Hello, it's just David here with my weekly message. As I've been saying, we've been asking 10 questions on a Sunday evening, and I've been given a kind of response in the sense of, you know, having a discussion group and talking about different options. And I'll be using these videos to say, well, what do I think in the end? Because I try to, in those sort of sessions, give more of a kind of overview of the issues involved. And the one we have today is there life after death? So, do I believe there is? Yes, I do, frankly. And I'm going to tell you why. First of all, I'm not convinced. Some people said, you can be a Christian and not believe in life after death. I'm not sure if you can, really. I mean, you can be a perfectly good person, of course, but I just think that the idea of some existence beyond this life is so important to the Christian faith, and also to the idea of God's justice. That in the end, things will be put right. I think because I just think I'm quite lucky, but lots of people in this world live quite a miserable life, and if that's all there is to their existence, people who perhaps children who die very young through the diseases of infancy, having had a pretty grim time of it. If that's all there is, then I kind of think, well, there isn't any justice or much hope. So I do think that life after death is an important part of Christian faith. I should say it's not everything. I mean, sometimes people have characterized Christianity and religion more generally as pie in the sky, but no meat here on earth. And I think that's something we must avoid. I mean, we must value this life and we must look after people in this life. Simply because I've described the sort of misery that some people go through, I don't think sort of pie in the sky should be a kind of replacement for care and love for people in this life. But yes, I do believe it. And you might think, well, is it just wishful thinking then that I hope that things work out in the end? That for a lot of people, it might be about seeing loved ones or remembering those who they've loved. I've mentioned the idea of sort of God's justice not kind of working out if there isn't some sort of life after death. Is it therefore just wishful thinking that these things should happen? Well, of course, I suppose that's part of it. You've got to acknowledge that we want to see our loved ones, those whom we miss. Neither do I particularly. I'm particularly swayed by things like people say near-death experiences. I mean, I think those are kind of comforting, and I've had it in my own family. I remember very clearly one of my grandparents describing a near-death experience. But I don't think, I think they can be explained other ways. I don't think they're the clinching argument. I think they're kind of steps on the way. Some people also, we mentioned this in the session, talk about sort of past lives. Now, of course, that's quite different. I mean, there are some belief systems. I mean, Plato, for instance, believed in the transmigration of souls. Other people believe in reincarnation. So it could be that you have a previous life. That's not really a Christian belief. Christians believe that for me, this is my first life, and my second life, if you like, is in heaven, hopefully. So that's the kind of Christian belief. So you might think, well, why do I believe it? I think there's two reasons. I mean, first of all, I just think human consciousness, and I've made a bit of a study of this. I know it can be explained in all sorts of ways. Actually, I don't think any of those explanations are entirely satisfactory. I think there's something about being a human being, about being self-aware, and indeed that's true of animals as well. I'm not, it's to a lesser extent, but it's true of animals. That idea of being a conscious agent, human being, sentient, knowing, demanding of respect, etc., I think is something that isn't fully explained by science. I know, I mean, it goes partially, that's fine. We can get computers to do all sorts of clever things. There's AI, etc. But at no point in AI at the moment have we said, well, how are we treating our robots? If my computer dies because I need it desperately for work, frankly, if it if it's dead, I go and buy another one. I've got no option. I don't feel sad. I don't feel I should have, I should have really tried with the other one. I should have put it on life support and visited it every day and brought it grapes. I just think, oh, nuisance, it's dying. I must get another one. I hope I can rescue my documents and stuff. So I think, until we start getting to saying, well, I'm terribly worried about my robot, and I think my robot might be dying and I'm terribly upset by it, then I think really we're nowhere near talking about them being sentient. So I do think that's a mystery. And I know people say, well, in 2000 years' time, yeah, that's fine, prepared. I mean, there's all sorts of arguments I could go into at that point. But yeah, I think there's something unexplained about sort of what it means to be sentient, meaning-seeking beings. And I think that's important. We're seeking meaning. A computer isn't. It's transacting mathematical manipulations incredibly quickly. A million times faster than I can. But it's not seeking meaning. It's not pondering. Why am I here? It's just kind of doing what's instructed to do. So that's that. Yeah, that's kind of what that's one thing, and therefore I think there is something that's beyond the material, if you like. Now, of course, that doesn't answer life after death, but it does say, well, there's a possibility of something which is, when my body decays and dies, there is something else, a property which might survive it. Then my second piece of the jigsaw, I think, it is, as a Christian, a follower of Jesus Christ. I mean, and I think here it's interesting. We read all sorts of things at funerals. The one bit we never read now is 1 Corinthians 15, which is interesting, or very rarely, because it's the only reading which is given in the Book of Common Prayer for the burial service. I mean, interestingly, no funeral service there, just the burial at the graveside. And there you would read nearly all of 1 Corinthians 15, very long, very involved chapter. And it's interesting, 300 years ago, you'd expect people to sort of understand it and listen to it in the freezing rain. Nowadays, we're in a warm crematorium, and we very often, we read 6 verses from John or something, or from Revelation. But fine, I'm not knocking that, and that's what I do. But I do think, if you really want to get into the issue, read 1 Corinthians 15, because there Paul describes the resurrection of the body. And that's, of course, more difficult. I mean, it's easier to say there's a soul, your body dies, your soul escapes to heaven. And there is something in that. But Paul describes something slightly more nuanced than that. He says that Christians believe in the resurrection of the dead. And he says, well, why should you believe in this outlandish belief? And I mean, by the way, like me too, he says that if you the faith is vain without it. And so he describes this resurrection of the body, and he says, it's different from the body that we have. So he says, this is a body that's imperishable, it's glorified, it's powerful, and it's spiritual. It's different from the body that you have at the moment. It belongs to the new heaven and new earth. You can't find it here. You're not going to sort of watch people put on this new body after death. I mean, he's not that naive, but he thinks in the new heaven and new earth we will have some sort of bodies for our souls, and we will live in the kingdom of God. And so his kind of evidence for that is Jesus' resurrection from the dead. So he says, look, Jesus is the first fruits of them that have slept. In other words, he's died, he's been raised. He comes alive with this sort of slightly strange body, the body that can appear and, seem to enter locked rooms, but also a body that you can put Thomas's hands and fingers into his hands and sides. But then also a body that's obviously destined for heaven. He ascends to be with the Father. It's a kind of just that foretaste, that of the first fruits of what we shall inherit. And so I do think, arguments for the resurrection of Jesus are important, because I do think if that's just a load of mumbo jumbo, then we're slightly lost. I do think that, yes, I believe Jesus is raised from the dead, and he is the first fruits of those who have slept. And in that we have a kind of sign of what we are destined for. And it's interesting because, you might say, well, lots of people believe in, the afterlife without believing in Jesus's resurrection, or generally the resurrection of the body. And you're right. Of course they do. Yeah, in different, lots of different belief systems. It's interesting that the Old Testament, who obviously don't know about Jesus's resurrection, and the Old Testament is written quite a while before Jesus. So remember, there's a kind of period in between. But in those books, really, there isn't any hope of resurrection. It really is all about this life, more or less. Now, I know people will talk me out. There's a verse in Job, there's a verse in Isaiah, etc., etc. But there's very little. I mean, mostly it is about this life. So it's only when, really, if you take the sort of story of the Bible, it's really only when Jesus rises from the dead that kind of resurrection enters the scriptures. Now, as I know you'll say, there's the odd verse here and there, and there is. You're absolutely right. But it's not a major theme. It's not a big thing in the Old Testament. It's only when Jesus is raised that we suddenly say, this is the first fruits. This is what the resurrection of the body means. This is what we've been thinking about. So as I say, that's kind of puts me where I am. I think the resurrection of Jesus and the mystery of human personality and consciousness are the kind of two things together which make me think there is something beyond this life, and therefore to believe in life after death, as well as Christian Aid would say it, life before death. Very important, I think, as Christians, we do both. Thank you.